In the 1960s, British agricultural trials recorded yields that appeared to sit outside normal biological limits. One plant produced close to 100 tons per acre, year after year, on soil where other crops consistently failed. The same plant was cut 5 times within a single growing season, each time returning to full height in roughly 4 weeks. It required no fertilizer input, no irrigation once established, and no replanting for decades. Some trial plots were left in place for 20 years without decline. Laboratory analysis added another layer of difficulty to explain. While most green manures require weeks to decompose before nutrients become available, this plant broke down in soil within 48 hours. The leaves seemed to dissolve, releasing their stored minerals almost immediately. In Victorian England, it had already been cultivated as a safeguard against crop failure and hunger. By 1954, one man had systematically bred 21 varieties of this plant, searching for a form that balanced yield, resilience, and safety. Yet by 2001, it had disappeared from garden centers across the United States. At the same time, the global fertilizer industry was generating hundreds of billions of dollars each year, consuming vast amounts of natural gas and producing large carbon emissions to sell nutrients that this plant produced on its own. The plant was Comfrey, Symphytum officinale. The effort to remove it from common use offers a record of what happens when natural systems provide something that cannot be easily controlled. The story begins in 90 AD, when the Greek physician Dioscorides described a plant with thick, sticky roots in De Materia Medica. That text remained Europe's primary medical reference for nearly 1,500 years. Dioscorides prescribed the plant for broken bones. Its Greek name, Symphytum, translates as to make grow together. Roman writers tested the claim. Pliny the Elder recorded that the roots could be boiled into a paste capable of binding flesh. The adhesive held. For nearly 2 millennia, Europeans referred to the plant as knitbone. Its reputation was medical, practical, and unremarkable, folded quietly into daily life. In 1845, its significance shifted. Henry Doubleday was a poor Quaker living in Essex when the Irish potato famine struck. Over the following years, roughly 1 million people died of starvation. Doubleday watched the crisis unfold with no means to intervene. He had previously attempted to manufacture starch and later glue for postage stamps. Both ventures failed. What remained were the images of mass hunger. In the 1850s, while searching for a new source of glue, Doubleday contacted the head gardener at the Royal Palace in St. Petersburg. He requested a specific Russian variety of comfrey, known for its thick roots and vigorous growth. What arrived was not what he had asked for. The plants were not pure Russian comfrey. They were an accidental cross, an F1 hybrid, expressing a level of genetic vigor absent in either parent. Doubleday did not set out to breed a new plant. He encountered one. The results were immediate and difficult to ignore. The hybrid produced yields unlike anything previously recorded. Harvests approached 100 tons per acre. Doubleday abandoned his glue experiments. The famine had clarified his priorities. This plant, he believed, offered protection against future starvation. For the next 30 years, he dedicated himself to understanding its potential as a food and forage crop. He measured yields, tracked regrowth, and observed soil effects. He worked without institutional backing and without profit. When he died at the age of 92, he remained poor, still focused on the plant he believed could feed people when other systems failed. Then the record ended. After his death, Doubleday's family burned his papers. 30 years of observations, yield records, cultivation methods, and nutritional analyses were destroyed. The scope of his work disappeared entirely. Without documentation, comfrey cultivation slowly declined. As the Industrial Revolution reshaped agriculture, mechanization and chemical inputs replaced perennial systems. Annual crops suited machines. Fertilizers came in bags. The memory of a Quaker producing extraordinary yields with little more than a spade faded from practice. By the early 20th century, comfrey had become a historical footnote, its capabilities intact, but largely forgotten. In 1948, a young horticulturist named Lawrence Hills came across Henry Doubleday's forgotten work. The fragments that remained were incomplete, but enough survived to suggest that something valuable had been lost. Hills decided to reconstruct what the fire had erased. He founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association and began collecting Comfrey strains from across Britain. Each variety was grown under the same conditions. Every cut was weighed. Every regrowth interval was measured. Hills recorded what the earlier records no longer showed. Over time, one strain consistently outperformed the rest. It was labeled Bocking 14. Bocking 14 proved different in several important ways. It was sterile, producing no viable seed, which meant it could not spread uncontrollably. It showed strong resistance to disease. Most notably, it delivered the highest nutrient content of any Comfrey Hills tested. In every trial, it returned more biomass, faster regrowth, and greater mineral concentration than its counterparts. When the results became clear, Hills made a decision that separated his work from prevailing agricultural practice. He refused to patent the plant. Instead, he distributed it freely. Anyone who wrote to him received root cuttings by mail. Gardeners in England planted it. Farmers in Africa tested it. Experimenters in the United States passed it between themselves. By the time Hills retired, Bocking 14 was growing on 6 continents. Laboratory analysis explained why this behavior caused concern within the chemical fertilizer industry. Fresh Comfrey leaves contained unusually high concentrations of potassium. While farmyard manure typically held less than 1.5% potassium, Bocking 14 exceeded 7%. Calcium and phosphorus levels were also elevated. More significant than concentration was speed. Most green manures, including alfalfa, clover, and grasses, require weeks in compost before nutrients become available. Their high fiber content slows microbial breakdown. Comfrey leaves behave differently. With low structural fiber, soil microbes consume them rapidly. When fresh Comfrey is added to a compost pile, internal temperatures rise within hours. The material collapses into dark humus, while other plant matter remains largely unchanged. The source of this behavior lies below the surface. Comfrey roots penetrate deeply, reaching down as far as 10 feet. They extend beyond the reach of most vegetables and grains. At those depths, the roots access mineral reserves unavailable to shallow-rooted plants. Potassium, calcium, and phosphorus are drawn upward and concentrated in the leaves. Each harvest transfers nutrients from the deep subsoil to the surface. The plant functions as a biological nutrient pump. By the early 20th century, global agriculture faced a different crisis. Natural fertilizer sources such as guano deposits were being exhausted. Scientists warned that food production would fail without a new nitrogen source. German chemists responded by developing the Haber-Bosch process, synthesizing ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. The process prevented widespread famine. It also bound agriculture to fossil fuels. Today, the Haber-Bosch process supplies nitrogen to roughly half the world's food production. It consumes large quantities of natural gas and produces significant carbon emissions. The global fertilizer market exceeds $200 billion annually, built on the assumption that farmers must purchase nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium every year. Comfrey disrupts that assumption. Planted once, it produces for decades. It requires no fertilizer input because it is fertilizer. Once established, it needs no irrigation because its deep taproot accesses underground water. It requires no pesticides. Nothing feeds on it in sufficient quantity to matter. It does not need to be replanted. There is no annual purchase. If British farmers had adopted Henry Doubleday's approach, synthetic fertilizer adoption would have slowed. If home gardeners in the mid-20th century had widely planted Bocking 14, commercial fertilizer sales would have suffered. The implications were understood by those watching closely. This context makes the events of 2001 difficult to ignore. On July 6, 2001, the FDA issued a warning advising manufacturers to remove Comfrey dietary supplements from the market. The reasoning was clear. Comfrey roots contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds associated with liver damage when consumed internally in large amounts over extended periods. The FDA banned internal products such as pills, teas, and capsules. The distinction ended there. Headlines used a single word: toxic. Garden centers reacted by discontinuing Comfrey entirely. Nurseries refused to stock it. The public interpreted the warning as a statement about danger in handling or growing the plant. No clarification followed. No explanation was offered that Comfrey used as fertilizer poses no risk. No mention was made that soil microbes rapidly break down alkaloids. Within 5 years, Comfrey had vanished from mainstream gardening. Lawrence Hill's work disappeared from commercial shelves. The timing coincided with rising natural gas prices and consolidation within the fertilizer industry. The one plant that offered long-term independence was no longer available for sale, and yet the plant itself remained unchanged. Bocking 14 continues to perform exactly as it always has. It still produces close to 100 tons per acre under favorable conditions. Its leaves still decompose in soil within 48 hours. Potassium levels remain above 7%. Once established, Comfrey tolerates temperatures down to -30 degrees. It survives drought, grows on marginal land, and persists without intervention. Because Bocking 14 is sterile, it does not spread beyond where it is planted. It does not invade surrounding ground. It remains fixed, waiting to be cut. When the plant reaches roughly 2 feet in height, it can be harvested. Within 4 weeks, it regrows. This cycle can repeat up to 5 times per season. Each harvest yields close to 20 tons per acre, resulting in approximately 100 tons annually, sustained over 2 decades. The uses remain straightforward. Leaves can be laid as mulch around crops such as tomatoes. They can be soaked to produce liquid fertilizer. They can be added to compost piles to accelerate breakdown. In every case, the function is the same. Fertility is created without purchase. From 1845 to 2001, Comfrey was reduced in stages. Henry Doubleday's records were lost to fire. Industrial agriculture favored annual systems over perennials. Regulatory confusion removed the plant from public access. None of these events altered the underlying mathematics. The fertilizer industry generates vast revenue by selling inputs that must be replaced every year. Natural gas companies profit when nitrogen synthesis remains essential. That system depends on continued dependence. Comfrey operates outside it. The plant cannot be patented. It cannot be modified to require annual purchase. It reproduces from a single root fragment and persists without permission. Lawrence Hill's understood this constraint. That is why he distributed Bocking 14 freely. Decentralization was not incidental. It was protection. A plant shared without ownership cannot be recalled. Today, Comfrey still grows where people remember it. In permaculture gardens, allotments, and small farms, it remains present. Those who use it understand what the numbers represent. 1 planting, 20 years of harvest, no external inputs. Fertility that does not arrive in bags. The plant has not disappeared. It has retreated from visibility. It exists underground, both literally and figuratively. Root cuttings are passed quietly between gardeners. Bocking 14 survives in the same form Lawrence Hill's selected. The characteristics Henry Doubleday observed after the famine remain unchanged. The plant is not fragile. It tolerates neglect. It persists through cold and drought. It does not compete aggressively, and it does not Comfrey is not a weed. It is a closed loop. It is a system that produces abundance without transaction. The effort to erase it over more than a century reflects its value. An industry worth hundreds of billions depends on forgetting that fertility can be grown. Comfrey remains exactly where it was left. Rooted, functional, unpatented, waiting.